having committee stipends as separate line items, are you talking about all committees having like each committee having their own line item, or just committee stipends in one?
The charter requires that the city
Right.
council stipend is on its own line. So that's all I'm saying. Because
Right.
right now in the legislative budget, we have the city council stipends plus the potential community advisory board and the best committee stipends all on one line. So we'll just need to break those out.
So it's only separating the city council and not the others?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, because I just wanted to make sure that if somebody, say, if we had the housing commission as a unique line item, that then someone wouldn't be able to quickly just do the math and say, oh, it seems as if X number of people are taking it and aren't doing it, to just try to help a little bit without shaming somebody into either taking or not taking the stipend. That was the
Yes.
only impetus.
Yep.
For us, yeah, that is what that is.
Yeah, and I'd have to think about that a tiny bit just to make sure in my mind that we don't have any other committees, that it's only one committee in a budget. Most of them are in the community development budget, and those are all, you wouldn't see that, but I'll have to think about that a little bit more in terms of where we put these other ones.
Okay.
Because we have, so,
Yeah.
excuse me, I have to talk to you a while. We have bike walk, tree advisory, housing. We've discussed, that's it, right, currently? Operating right now?
Capital.
Capital, excuse me, sorry. So 4, we've talked about resurrecting some kind of economic development or downtown, or both.
Yep.
2, 1, don't. No, yeah, one of you. There's been discussion in the community about getting to a place where we can form a rec advisory committee.
Yep.
And, a lot of these are optional, right? So we're not paying by showing up. People can request to do this as needed. So that does leave us some flexibility if we have a special community project come up. Maybe there's an ordinance discussion that we want to have that includes that we need special input from people. Maybe we're trying to reach certain portions of our community. That budget also can be used there because it's unlikely, and I think our history tells us that we're budgeting for the amounts we would need in the maximum, but that money's not all being taken out. So I think that's kind of a benefit of that. And we do have some flexibility as we reach out for different things. And I sort of anticipate with this next year, especially at 24, that we're going to have a lot of community outreach as we get things going as a new city, and as we ramp up different efforts. So I don't think we'll need more than this. I just think it's nice that we're going to have the flexibility to engage with people.
Just to elaborate for those listening, because the hard part of government budgeting is that we have to plan now. And so if we're going to do something next year, we need to put it in the budget now. Otherwise, it is going to be very difficult for that to happen. So in 8 months, if somebody or a group comes to us and says, hey, we think it'd be fantastic if the city had a party planning committee, had a new resident or new community member welcoming committee. Great, thank you. And we don't have money in the budget to pay for the stipend, so that can't happen this fiscal year. It needs to wait until the next fiscal year. So hence part of that difficulty in this process of if it wasn't planned for, then sorry, it can't happen until the next budget year. Anything else?
I'm good on that piece.
Broadly with the budget?
I'm sorry, what?
Broadly with the budget?
I just want to first of all observe that our new manager and finance director, I can't say how pleased I am and thankful and grateful I am. I thought you guys did a great job putting this together, and as a team, just not having worked with each other, and you came together very quickly and put together a great presentation. So I really appreciate that. Everything was really clear. The whole mock budget thing was a good idea. I only going to observe, you just touched on it briefly. I do want to point out that, and I'm not picking on recreation, but our recreation budget has increased almost 100% in 3 years. It went from, I can't remember where it was 620, and we're over $1 million. I understand all of the specifics of the recreation budget, why one thing or another. Nevertheless, sometimes you have to step back from the forest, and so you don't see the trees, and look at something, because At the same time, in the same time period, our capital transfers, which is our capital costs, our repairing of critical infrastructure, that budget actually declined. Now, I know that that budget is pegged to upcoming pending capital projects. We try to anticipate and put the money in a year ahead of time. But that's telling us where our priorities are, and it's a little concerning. And so as someone who is leaving the board, I do urge you, and we've heard this from some of our constituents, I do urge you to put some kind of a recreation oversight or committee in place, just to make sure that we understand that this is a significant commitment this community is making to recreation, as opposed to some other things that we could be making commitments to. And so I'd like to make sure that we get community input and guidance on that going forward.
Absolutely, Georgia. In terms of the new committees that are within Regina's memo, the Recreation Advisory Committee is one of the ones that will have money budgeted to be paying for. My English was not very good there, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Great. Thanks. So I know that at our last meeting, we had a conversation around stipends and around our city council stipends. Raj, do you want to touch on this? Do you want me to go first? So based on our last conversation, one thing just contextually in thinking about how that conversation went and the things that we're trying to do around diversity, around equity and inclusion, none of us in this room are experts in the subject. None of us in this room have our crystal ball or magic 8-ball and know if we do one thing here, what that is then going to do tomorrow, what that's then going to do in 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, 10 years. We have no idea. And so we are here in this fog of either doing nothing and hoping for the best or doing something and hoping for the best. Personally, I do not believe in doing nothing and hoping for the best. To me, that's a fool's errand. My words. And I would propose that we do something in terms of starting a conversation from a budgetary standpoint and to try to find some kind of a happy medium. I would propose, instead of the 6,500 that was originally proposed, that we do 5,000 per council member.
I mean, I'll go next just not saying anything. I'm fine with that. I put this together after talking to a bunch of people. I spent the past few days talking to some people that do have some knowledge around this with the state. It is a conversation that's happening every day now in the State House. They're trying to address it. It's happening in boards similar to ours now around the state, not just here. And it's centered around, you know, and I included this in the memo, people in local leadership positions remain unaware of their biases or shortcomings and perpetuate a system where marginalized voices are further excluded from community affairs. Not on purpose. We're not doing anything here. I just want to clarify because it got a little confusing last time. I don't believe we're doing anything in here to make that. We're not knowingly coming at that. We're not intending that. Nothing we're doing. What we're trying to do is serve the community. And what we've all been doing is doing that. So this isn't a comment on that at all. This is recognizing that when I was out recruiting for YouTube, for placing YouTube, for instance, I was talking to like single mothers who I thought would be great to come on here and having them identify things that weren't, you need to pay me. It was, how much time does it take? All right, well, let me look into that. It's like, wow, so what would you need? Well, babysitting right now in the community is about $20 an hour per kid. So if we just cover our meetings and pre-work, it's 20, you know, so you get to that point where you're trying to say to people, we really want to hear you. You know, we don't have anybody on this board, for instance, that we're welcoming to the community that lives in all the new development we're bringing in. It is going to take some effort to meet them where they are, to get them here, because we are saying that we want their participation. We need to hear from them because we need to know what to do with the community. I mean, we know some things, right? But we don't know what, we can't speak for them. We just simply can't. We can guess, you know. So, and the irony there is, we could, you know, I've heard. I'm not laughing at anybody else, just myself for saying it like this. But we can say to ourselves, we should really get out there and talk to them. But we've already seen in numbers how much time we are currently spending, or anybody in our role, not just not about us, would already be spending just doing this work. So to then say, why don't you spend more time having a Saturday morning community conversation at Autumn Pond? Or stopping by when there's a barbecue? Okay, well, that's adding on in a way that's already, it's ironic to me. So I think there are all kinds of ways to come to a number. I don't pretend to say that all of a sudden before the petitions for this election are due, that we're going to see a flood or even one. And I can't predict that we're going to see many more next election. But we're these budgets, they're numbers and their expenditures and their revenues, but they're policy statements, they're value statements. And what we're saying to our community by doing this is, it's expensive, but in the grand scheme of things, I think 5,000 is $4 and maybe 10 cents on the average home. Not nothing, because that happens every year. What we're saying is, we really do want that input. We're going to meet people where they are. We can adjust it. This isn't in the charter, this isn't in so it's not in our community constitution. We can come back in a couple of years and say, well, that didn't really get us much. I don't know what the time frame would be, but if we're not getting the result we want, we can pivot. The reason this is coming up now rather rushed, and I didn't say this last time, I didn't know the two of you. I didn't know we were gonna have 2 open seats. So that's not necessarily important, because people still have to get elected, as you rightly pointed out, Dan. But it's harder to run against somebody that's already in. Right now we have open seats, so it's really, they don't have to compete against current board members. So that does make it easier, right? So if we're going to go out and try to round up some people and try to really convince them that they belong here, they can do it, we're going to support them this way as a community, and we value them. It's a good time to do it. It's a little last minute, I guarantee. I grant you that. Also, we have to make, like Andrew pointed out, we have to make this decision now for next March and April, for the next petition season. So if we don't put this in now, we're not only are we missing an opportunity for these 2 seats, but we're missing an opportunity for the next 2 seats. And that's 80% of our board. We've basically said we're gonna wait. And those seats that'll be 6 years. We're waiting to see that turnover. And so I realize this is last minute, it's sudden, it was unexpected, but I think part of it comes from just being opportunistic in a way and saying, this is a good time to bring this up, in the sense that it's a good time for people to join the board. And I'll stop. I've got other things I could say.
Can I
comment?
all right.
All right. I did want to express that I've thought a lot about what you said, and I still disagree. I disagree with the $5,000 stipend increase of 5,000 or up to 5,000. The things I've contemplated this issue, and a couple things come to mind. Like I said, there's no guarantee that we're going to get those, people to come from that community that you're talking about, whatever, single mothers or BIPOC community, or what have you. The things I see that could not tie to cost, but like you said, it's hard to be an incumbent, is term limits. Increasing the size of the board from 5, these are charter things, but increasing the size of the board from 5 to 7 members. So, you're getting a larger, board, but potentially from more things. Because to try and placate every group, I mean, you could break it down to the elderly. We heard from people talking about the senior bus and all the things. There are many, many groups, factions, whatever out there that want to be heard. I mean, to get representation from all of them, we'd probably have a board of, who knows, 30, 40 people. Who knows how many, what is the right number, and how many people have to be on board to make it equitable, or what people think is going to be equitable. So I think term limits, I think, potentially increasing the size of the board. Another thing could be, we have committees or groups or advisory boards reaching out to people. We had it with the police department with these issues. I don't see why we can't do such, so we can get input from the youth, the elderly, the handicapped, everybody out there that's in a position where they'd love to be able to have input, but it's difficult for them to get involved with this due to whatever, limitations they have. And to think that money is going to solve it, I disagree.
Can I jump in? Okay. I'd like to bring a completely different dimension into this. Okay. I'm going to start by saying, I think and I discussed this with Andrew previously, when we were putting the charter together, there were a bunch of little areas that troubled me, but we were in a rush. We needed to make it in time for the legislative session. So we kind of let a lot of stuff go. And I think we're making some good corrections this year. But compensation for the city council was one of those issues that I was a little leery about, and here's why. I think it's inappropriate and kind of borderline unethical for any elected board in charge of a municipal budget to give itself a raise. And in effect, the way the charter is set up, by simply putting a raise for the city council into the general fund budget, and we've already seen that this is a controversial issue, and we've gotten emails already, and we've seen this is controversial. This question, because you can come at it from so many different angles, begs significant community input, but you're not going to get that because you're going to put it into the general fund budget, and people who don't agree with giving us a raise, what's their choice? The only choice is to vote down the police, the fire department, public works, capital. They have to vote down the entire municipal budget in order to say, no, I don't want you to get a raise. Okay? And in other words, we're in effect holding the municipal budget hostage. Okay? I'm sorry, but that's how I look at it. I would like to propose a kind of a compromise here, if I can. How do we get around it? Look at the charter language. How do we get around it? I would like to propose that we put a question on the ballot about doing this. Okay? Not a separate line item, but a separate question. So shall the FY25 budget include a proposal to increase city council stipends to $5,000? Obviously, it would have to take effect in the following year's budget, in the FY25 budget, right? Because we can't retroactively put it back into the budget because the budget's going to have been approved. But let me point out, I don't think we can disagree on a lot of things, but I think we can all agree, I don't think there's an emergency here. I don't think that the wheels of government are going to come undone if the Essex Junction City Council doesn't get a pay raise this July. I think this could wait. I think then you would know it's going to be in place, Raj, by the next election cycle. You would know it's going to be in there, okay? And that would give us the opportunity to really hear what the community has to say. Because there are a lot of people looking at this, at our budget, and we have just heard from a couple are going, gee, I voted for separation thinking I was going to see a decrease in it's complicated because of inflation, because we had the transfer, but nevertheless, there are people out there who are looking at us saying, what is it that you guys ever say no to? You say yes to everything, but when do you say no to some request? So, but on the other hand, I completely understand the issues that you're raising, Raj. So I hear a lot about community input. Let's get some real significant binding political community input. Put this as a question on the upcoming ballot that's going to annual meeting. At annual meeting, we can explain our positions. You can make your case. It can be debated publicly. If the people say yes, then the city council has its answer. The other reason why I think it's an ethical way to approach this is because it really does kind of distance the current city council from the pay increase that happens. In other words, two of the members we're certainly not going to benefit from it, but two of the other members may not benefit from it. It's for a board that's going to be put together a year from now. So that makes it less like we're looking just to compensate ourselves, as opposed to saying, we think that this is a good move, a good governance move. Okay, so I would like to make that proposal as a compromise. The only other thing I'm going to add, I do want to point out that there are a lot of unknowns about why people in some populations don't apply for the board or don't run for the board. I want to point out that what we do know out there in Essex Junction is that there are thousands of people, middle and upper income people, who also don't run for the board. Okay? Is that because they're bad people? They don't care about their community? Of course not. They care about their community, but they don't want to get involved because they don't care. They're not that interested. They don't want to take on that degree of responsibility. They don't want to be in the public eye. They don't want to have to go and knock on doors and get a petition signed. And so when I say, and so they don't, and so we can understand why those people, and it's understandable why people who could run for the board, they have the resources and the time to run for the board, and we don't, and they don't, and yet we say that's okay. Well, why doesn't that logic and that reasoning apply across to everyone in every other community, low-income people, people in marginalized communities? I think that I'm just pointing out that you're right, putting more money into the city council compensation, it is a real shot in the dark that it's going to do anything. And in fact, it could do just the opposite of what you want. It could encourage more people from other parts of the community, not marginalized parts of the community, to also run, and they could further displace it. I just don't know what to say. I don't think that there's a clear path. I'm not sure it's fiscally responsible for us to spend money on something that we're not really clear what the problem is, and we have absolutely no idea if it's going to have an effect. I think we have to understand that a lot of people would question whether that's a reasonable thing for the city council to do. So that's why I will go back to my suggestion that we put this as a separate question, let the community weigh in on it, and then that will inform next year's budget by the city council.
Thank you, George. Amber, did you want to add anything at this point?
I'll just add a quick comment. I'm struggling with this question, honestly. I do think it's always nice to add an increase, because I think that's just the general. I mean, the city council stipend stayed at what it was for years, and then we got the increase. We had the increase last year. I'm just struggling with that large of an increase. And I hear the counter proposal of 5,000, but I'm not 100% sold that I would go that far. Maybe 2,000, 2,500. I appreciate all of the research that Raj has done on this, and I totally understand where he's coming from in regards to the numbers that he's proposing. But I will just say that one of the biggest impediments to me even stepping up was not the monetary piece of it, was the time commitment. As somebody who works 40 plus hours a week, it's not the 2 hours that we sit here on a Zoom call or at 2 Lincoln. It's the 4 hours that we're spending reading 200 pages on top of trying to live our lives here. And so that's while I see the monetary piece of it, I guess I'm also agreeing with Dan and George and saying, I'm not sure that that's the reason entirely why we don't have the diversification on the board. So I guess I'm still in an, I don't know where I'm at kind of position, but just wanted to share my thought process.
Great. Thank you, Amber. In terms of moving this forward,
Can I say a couple things that we move forward? Just a couple comments.
Mm-hmm.
So I think overall, I completely understand where you're both coming from. Term limits have been discussed before. We're discussed yesterday at the state house. There's pros and cons to that. As you said before, people still need to get elected. And I think, George, that's where, when you refer to those people who might make more than the average, or some of those people that might make less, everybody here still has to get elected. I don't think the community is going to all of a sudden go, that guy, that's the one, if they don't believe in them. So I think some of those concerns, while I hear exactly what you're saying, I think the community is a little more savvy in terms of who they're gonna put on the board. So I don't actually share that concern. But overall, I think the theme I'm hearing and my thought to all of this is you're asking a system that's in place to change itself, to reduce its power. You know, so if you think about this as a system and you're looking at it and saying, well, it should just agree that at some point, and you know, it's a way to kind of perpetuate that system. When people say, well, we can't quantify it, we're going on faith, we're gonna, you know, see how it goes, we'll ask the community. Very few of these moves of this type in our country's history have been by popular vote. And had they been left to popular vote, would not have happened. We'd still be dealing with other things. I'm not equating this to that necessarily. I'm saying there are no, I'll come back to it, single mothers on this board. There's nobody under 30, right? You know,
You see the grades? What are you talking about?
29.
Sure, yeah, 10 years ago.
There, you know, we could go on and on and on. It's not simply a BIPOC concern. But I've been out talking to a lot of people who care just as deeply about our community as everybody in this room right now. And I know all of you, amazing people. But every time we're in one of these meetings and I look out and there's more than 2 people, it's all of us. It's just us. And I know there's a dozen people probably watching on YouTube. Some will watch later. There's probably 8 people on Zoom right now that aren't employees or staff. It's always us. We always joke about it's how it's always us. I'm not mad at it. And we always joke. I think it's funny. We go to elections, same poll workers. We go to committees, same people volunteering. You know, we had a great turnout for the hiring committee. That was cool. And we got people we were interested in. We can't talk them into coming on the board. It's, you know, I put in the memo how much this would cost. Again, not trivial. I don't pretend any expenditure in our budget is trivial. But I think the community, and I will, we're not making a decision tonight. I'll think about what you said about the advisory. You know, we've done it with other things. My concern about that, like I said, is you're asking a system that sort of benefits from leaving it alone to change itself. And I don't have a history of that happening. I don't see where that's happened before, especially when people can say, well, you're just trying to get to a percentage. I mean, Dan, I think I know what you mean, but I think when you talk about this, you try to, I think you're trying to kind of, is the answer you're looking for, what are the numbers we want to see? We're not looking for a target. We're looking for voices. We're looking for life experience, lived experience. We're looking for lived experience. There's no target, there's no right number. It will change election to election. So I don't want us to get caught up with what's the right ratio. You know, are we on percentage for the number of people who speak English as a second language that are in our community? The simple fact is that the majority of the growth by far in the state of Vermont were people of color, non-English speakers as first languages, and others in this past census. So I'm not saying that's the target. It's a wide net. So I'm just trying to answer, and again, George, I'll give that some thought about, you know, should we do that? And we'll get some feedback from people, I think. But,
Can I respond to your thing about the percentage and stuff? I don't disagree with you. It doesn't have to be a percentage, but you're talking about single mothers. You're talking about different people from different backgrounds, different life experiences on the board. As I said earlier, how many different voices do we all have different voices. I have a different background than you do. We all have different backgrounds, and it depends on how you look at it, Raj, okay? So my background is law enforcement, my whole life, okay? I am a single father. I think the rest of you guys are all married, okay? And, okay, well, I still was for all the term, whole time, whether I was on the planning commission all the way through, rec advisory council, this board, and worked the job. It was shift work, nights, weekends, call outs for search and rescue, everything. I made it work. It was difficult and not easy, but that's something I chose to do. And it's not, no one forces you to do it. And I try to represent all the people and don't I felt kind of almost like an affront to me that because I can't, we don't, the initial message was, we don't represent our community. And I think we do. And to think that, I'd like to know, because I'm not of a unique situation, whatever you're describing it, I can't represent those people. Our federal representatives, up for the longest time, Bernie Sanders, Patrick Leahy, and Peter Welch, 3 old white guys. They represent the state of Vermont. Okay, we have a supermajority in Montpelier of Democrats. Okay, they got the House, they've got the Senate. We have a moderate governor, but we talk about inequities, but we don't look beyond. We talk countrywide. So there's a lot of ways you can look at the picture. I'm just saying, I disagree with trying to solve this by putting money to it. I want to hear voices from everybody. We try and do that. We're doing a lot more of it, like I said before. Now that we Skype in meetings, like I said before, Patty Benoit used to come around with that 3-ring binder to teach our houses and drop that off for our meetings. Now we get people calling in. We have much more attendance than we ever had in the 12 years I've been on this board. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Is it perfect? No, but it's a process. We move forward. We've moved forward quite a bit, and that's all I'll say right now.
Yeah, I just want to say yes to everything you were saying. I'll add that when you were talking about we have other committees, they can report to us and then we can do something about it.
Mhm.
That's through our filters. We filtered that. We bring our way of thinking, our life experience, and interpret what they tell us in our own way, and then make our decision. They're not making that decision, is what I'm saying. So when we say it's good enough to have that representation there, my reaction to that is, yes, you're right. It is amazing to have that representation there. That's enough. And when we say we don't need to make that impact on this board, we're saying it's good enough to have it there, and then we're just going to let that filter through the same group of people that always serve. So we're keeping that lack of representation in the decision-making table. It's kind of like I heard from somebody about the budget. My interests aren't being represented. This is an increase. Valid. I asked some questions about that. They're not here in this group. We can think like them, we can hear them, and we can say, I think they'll like this. But it's even the people you're talking about, George. Like we're filtering, we're always filtering. It's like newspaper writing. Editors will always filter the writer. That's what ends up in the paper. I'm just doing that so you can reflect to it, right? But it's the same thing. It's our filter. And we don't have to go on this all night because we've got a long meeting and we don't have to decide tonight. But I just want this continued thinking about it. And I appreciate the input. I really do. So I'll stop.
I want to clarify, but let me quickly, as a former editor, I want to say, considering the state of social media today, I think things were a lot better off when they did go through an editorial.
I will agree with you
But we'll
100%
put that issue aside. I'm trying to say, Raj, I'm trying to say, this is a lively debate, and so I'm posing the question to the city council: why not amplify this debate and let the community have this debate? And let them vote on it. I understand what you're saying, that sometimes an institutional structure doesn't want to change itself, but I think we're a pretty flexible, progressive group here in Essex Junction, and I would trust the voters on this, and I would just really urge us to try to let's get community input on it, put it on a ballot as a separate question. Again, I have to point out, I've been on here 15 years, but I didn't even know they gave compensation when I joined. And so we've done a pretty good job for the last 15 years. I think holding off one more year is not going to be critical. And then if the answer is yes, then you guys will know what to do. And then in the next election cycle, in a year from now, the people who run for those seats, they will know that starting in a couple of months, they're going to get a little more compensation. See, if you bring,
because it's 2 elections, it's effectively 2 election cycles. They won't.
well, no, it would kick in. It would kick in that budget. It would kick in that fiscal year, in July of that fiscal year. So you would have it. It would only be a few months away.
You would miss this one.
You'd miss this one.
Right. No,
All you'd
right.
miss is this one.
Right.
And so it would kick in the following year. And so all I'm saying, and I don't think I think that's a reasonable compromise to make in order to really let the community weigh in on this and inform the board. And let me add, I would recommend that you guys either consider maybe altering this in the charter to to give the community a little more input into this down the road. And I think that would give you an opportunity to do that as well. So I would just urge you to do it. I think it would be a good thing. I think it would be good to have the community debate this and give us and give you guys their input on it.
So the only thing I'd like to wrap this up, the only things that I kind of want to add into this, in terms of somebody not liking a line item within our budget, whether that be our stipend, whether that be the amount for the police department, health officer, whatever, recreation, anything else in our budget, the only recourse anyone has is to vote the budget in its totality up or down, regardless of what it is. And so at some point in time, the people who have been elected by the community to make some of these tough decisions have to make a decision. And it's of course up to us whether we choose to utilize that power that has been given to us or whether we abdicate that power. With public input, I got 2 emails. I don't know about the rest of you. That's all I got. On Facebook, there was some lively conversation about this. Broadly, it was in support, a few against, but much more so in support of increasing the stipends. The question of should it be 6,500, 5,000, 4,000, different numbers were thrown around. A broad increase was favorable. I didn't see anything on Front Porch Forum. If there's other conversations on other forms of social media, I don't do those, so I have no idea. Term limits, I would say governance in general. One of the things we put in our charter is to have a study on governance and our governance options by year or within 3 years of the passage of our charter. So these are some conversations that I hope our community does have around our governance structure, around the number of people who sit at this table. Should we have wards, term limits, all those types of things. So again, we could look at that point in time other aspects of the system to change to then see what types of impact that may have. But again, as Raj is saying, this is a system with various attributes to the system. And so we can either change something, hope for the best, or do nothing and hope for the best. And we can continue that.
Well, I think you brought up a good point, Andrew. I think that it's reasonable to say that a board increasing its stipend is always going to be a controversial issue, I think. Okay. And just as staff wants to, if they want salary increases, operational increases, we're the boss in terms of that. They have to come to us and ask our permission. And who's our boss? Yeah. So I think it's time for us to go to the boss and ask the boss's opinion. Number one, and I think you raised a good question, because when we transitioned from having live meetings to Australian ballot, I think that there was a tacit necessity in there for us to not put controversial things into the Australian ballot budget, because as we know, I'm sorry, it does not get the scrutiny that it does when you had 200 or 300 people gathered at the auditorium, and stuff like this would get pulled out and debated, and people could change it from the floor. That doesn't happen, and it doesn't get that level of scrutiny before people vote on it. So again, I go back to saying that's why I think this is controversial. I think it's a fascinating debate for the community to have. I would urge us to just put it on hold. I think we can safely. The wheels of government, the government won't explode if we put it on hold for a year. Let the community have its say, and then that will inform the city council when you guys are putting the budget together next year. That would be my suggestion.
Anything new?
So many things. I think controversial really is, I guess, defined by whoever's looking at it.
Mhm.
So I could suspect that we have many controversial things in our budget. Just put that out there. I think this is, if we're looking to the state, this is how the legislature does it. And they're struggling right now with this question because they don't dare do this because it's politically difficult. They're also struggling and probably being impacted more by not being able to get the bodies they need to run and serve. And so we don't have to keep going on this. I think it's an interesting idea to have the community weigh in. I always want to know what the community thinks. I'm not going to say I don't trust them at all. But there's not a lot of history there. But I will, I'll think hard about it because, and talk to people about it, because I'll say that because I'm the one.
The thing about controversial things in our budget, Raj, the controversial things in our budget for projects or anything we want to, start new, add to the budget, this could be construed or looked upon as being self-serving. It's as opposed to the projects we do in the community benefits the community as a whole. Indirectly, you can make your argument and say this benefits the community as a whole. But I think if you were to poll a lot of people, they could say, well, this, you're giving yourselves a raise, as it were, and that is very self-serving. Whereas the other stuff, I don't look upon it as being self-serving, just as much as any member of, we can't have a person involved in public works, like Ricky Jones on this board, because he's conflict of interest. But his budget, he's dealing with his budget and everything. But I'm saying we're able to vote and say our personal stipend is going to go up this much, basically like George saying, and then they got to vote the whole, but it's tied to the budget. And then if they're opposed to it, it really doesn't get, it's
Just want to make sure we're not equating want to participate and good with volunteer and automatically losing that good and service to community with increase of stuff, because we're already paying ourselves.
right. I'm just saying.
It's always been something. It's just never.
Oh, it is. But I'm saying the
So I just wanna
extent.
make
I'm saying
sure.
the extent. I'm saying the extent. It's not. No. Across the board, communities, everyone, generally there's a stipend for community service. But I'm just saying the extent of it, the amount of it. This
Yeah.
adding it to
Gotcha.
So at the beginning of the public hearing, I said that we would then talk about the budget, and at that point in time, I would ask if there are public comments on things that they've heard so far. So with that in mind, if anybody either in the room or out in Zoom land wants to make a comment, have a question, things you've heard thus far about the budget, because after this, I'm thinking we're going to go off of this topic and on to the next agenda item, please go ahead and raise your hand. Marlon.
Just listen to the stipend talk and kind of maybe think of some things I wanted to maybe just toss it out just to give my 2 cents since I didn't participate online. So, I know Raj and I talked a little bit about it, but we talked about it on our own board too. From my perspective, taking it from an equity lens, I don't look at it as checking boxes off. I don't look at it as I need to pick one person from here, pick another person from there, pick another person from there to make sure that I fill all these boxes. That's not equity. Equity is giving everybody a chance to actually have a seat at the table. And I think, and again, I don't know, because again, I don't get as being off as I should. I can't check it online after the fact. I apologize for that, but I'll just have the open question for you guys. One, you guys did a lot this past year, making a city, and I appreciate that. There was obviously a lot of work, you put a lot of hours into that. But that including the years prior to that, for being on the board, how long? Like Andrew, how long have you been on the board?
Going on 12 years?
12
11 years?
And Raj, how long have you been?
This is my fourth.
George?
15.
Dan?
12.
Namber, how long have you been on the board?
I think it's 4, almost 4.
4 years. So you're the newbie technically on the board, even though you've been on.
Yeah, Raj and I are almost the same time frame.
Okay, so I'll ask the question to you guys, especially for the three that have got over a decade experience on the board. So in your time on the board, I'm certain there's times we've all missed meetings. I've missed meetings with the school board. I'm certain you guys missed meetings here because of commitments. Has there ever been a time where you guys have missed a board meeting, not because you had a prior commitment, but because you couldn't afford to come to a meeting? Like, let's say you got, you're at home and the kids are there. There's no way to watch them. You can't pay or afford to pay a babysitter to watch them, or you're having to work up to a certain point, and if you can't afford to miss work because you can't pay your bills. It's either come to the board meeting or it's I don't put food on my table, or I'm not able to provide for my family. Has that ever happened to the three of you specifically? So you guys, the three members on the board, do you recall a time that you've been on the board that they may have happened to you? You had to make that hard decision of like, I can't come to the board because if I don't, my family doesn't get paid, my rent doesn't get paid. My children don't get watched, and I'm unable to do that. So just out of curiosity.
I think that I think we can just broadly, completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Not trying to stop the comments.
Yes.
Just want to make sure we don't get into
And I don't mean, and I apologize for that. But the point of that question is this. I think that bringing up the idea of a stipend, and yes, some people feel it's a large amount, but I think for some folks, I think an argument we had in our board is, the point is this, is I think that the talk was of choice. Like, a lot of people choose not to want to do this work. It's a hassle, it's a pain, and it is. Trust me, I'm a newbie to this, and it is a pain to do this work. But when I look at it as that I have the ability that I don't have to worry about making that financial choice of, if I come to a meeting, is my family going to be fed? Is there going to be a roof over my house? And I think that's when we start talking about equity's point there. If I can afford babysitting, if I can afford to maybe miss a couple hours of a shift, that's not going to impact me to be able to have a seat at these tables, to help my voice be heard, and to make an impact in the work. Again, you guys have done great work, and I appreciate what you guys have done. It's not been easy. We've asked a heavy lift of all of you, and you guys have come through this community, and I appreciate that. I really, really do. But I think that sometimes we talk about equity, we focus on categories. We focus on, does the person next to me fit a certain category and look a certain way? That's not equity. Equity is allowing everybody an equal opportunity at these seats, at these tables that you guys have right now, that I have on Tuesday nights. I'm every Tuesday. I can tell you for a fact, not everybody in this community has that opportunity. It's not a choice, because a choice is I can do A or B, and at the end of the day, yeah, I may miss those things, but it's not going to have a major impact on my life. Equity is, if I choose B, I can have a very negative impact on myself, my family's life. So when we talk about equity, I just kind of want to put that in this paper as something to think about for food for thought, that I understand there's a lot of talk of it can be controversial, but I urge you guys from an equity lens to think about not so much of a choice, not so much as, people trying to fill boxes or fill spots here. It's about an opportunity for folks that we don't get a chance to hear very often. I will admit, on the school board, I got lauded repeatedly for being the first BIPOC person on the school board. And this school district has been here over 100 plus years. That shouldn't be a barrier, but I know there are others in the community it was a barrier for, and I heard them, I talked to them, and they appreciated me having a seat at that table. So I just ask you guys, when you think about this further, that yes, I understand where George's coming from. You want the community to speak, and I agree. I can understand that, and I agree with that. But I just say for you guys to hear this conversation, please think about that. That when you're looking at this here, it's about making sure everybody has an opportunity to have a seat at this table. And I know for a fact that not everybody in this community has that choice right now. Because we've seen in our board, people have not wanted to come to work because they can't. Not because they choose to, but because they flat out can't. And it's a financial issue right now for most of those folks. So I'll just leave it at that. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Marlon. Anybody else in the room? Bridget?
Just a couple of quick things. If you are planning or thinking about putting this stipend issue as a separate question on the ballot, as George suggested, it's going to require a lot of education, because people are just, I'm sorry, and once they understand the issues, understand the time you're spending, those kinds of things. So I would like to know that you will commit to doing that education, however you have to do it. Because I don't think putting it on the ballot is really going to have the effect in terms of community education that you're looking for. You want an informed decision made by the citizenry, and just putting it on there is not going to do that. I think you all know that, but it is a commitment to do that education. The second thing, going back to a comment that George made about reestablishing a recreation advisory council. I just want to be really clear. I served on that board, as did Dan, Raj. I served on that board for 12 years. It is not an oversight board. You would have to rewrite the charter, job, whatever you want to call it, if you want that kind of a board. We were an advisory board. We served as the conduit between the community and recreation. And we didn't have budget oversight and things like that. If that's what you're looking for, it's going to require a total rewrite of what we used as a mission statement. We changed charter a couple times, but never did we have that kind of oversight or supervisory capacity. So that's it.
Just to expand on that for one quick moment, since you brought it up, the other thing that it would likely require is a charter change, since we're very clear in the charter that the manager has the ultimate responsibility on the departments within our community, and that it is not given to the city council in terms of operational oversight, but rather our manager. And so if
that's occurred to me a lot in terms of this conversation, in relation to this conversation, especially having served on that board for as long as I did, council for as long as I did, using the rationale that recreation needs more oversight, if you will. You all are you're the oversight board. You and the manager oversee that. Aren't you at the same, thinking about this, does that mean that Public Works? Same kind of oversight, right?
I hear your logic.
Yeah. Can I what I was thinking, Bridget, is more like the Brownell Oversight Board. Now, that is in the charter, and it's in their foundation charter that they have to have a board like that. But I've been on that board, and certainly the director, Wendy, has control, and she proposes a budget, but then they have a lot of input to that budget before the budget comes to us. And that's really what I was sort of recommending for something like recreation.
Just so you know, you're not talking about advisory council. You're talking about some kind of an oversight board. And if that, again, would require a lot of research and education in terms to establish, because across the board, recreation advisory councils do not have that kind of power or oversight. They just don't. So that they're established to communicate with the community, to volunteer at events, to do those kinds of things. So you're talking about a wholly different kind of board.
Yep.
And I don't approve or disapprove. I'm just saying it's going to require some more.
Just one quick word. It's a $4 million cost center right now with all their program funds. That, I believe, is our largest cost center in the city.
Third, I think
it's a third.
I think it is.
I'm not sure.
What you call streets, which I call Public Works.
No, that's under 2 million.
It depends on what we're calling in terms of what you're including in terms of general fund or.
Well, I'm not trying to engender a conversation, but I'm just saying it's a very, very significant. It's no longer when you go from $500,000 a year to that much money. It's a significant amount of money, which requires a significant response. I think.
Right.
I'm not saying they're doing anything bad.
Right.
But that's a big budget.
I'm not defending or because I haven't been involved in that closely with that group for a while, but I do think we've asked rec to do a lot that we formally did in other, like, okay, they'll take it on. They'll take it on the Memorial Day Parade. They'll take this on. They'll take that on. And you can't do that and then say, wait a minute, your budget is increasing and that's not going to work. All of this is a part of the whole, right? It's a part of this whole examination of how a municipality runs, how it works, and how it works for the community, how it works for the staff, how it works for everybody. And this should be something we spend time on, and examine in terms of how we want this to work. And it's kind of the same conversation you're having about the getting people to serve, you know, and seeing the same people over and over again. I just think there's another thing we can do here. There's something else. And I mean, I've struggled with it for 20 years. I don't know, you know, but there's something else. There's a way that we can connect the community to the municipality, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yeah. I just want to say, I agree with you. We're going to have a strategic planning process at some point in the near future. One of the things I wanted to talk about, because there's all of a sudden, there's a lot of talk about recreation advisory committee right now, and then, you know, it's fine. We had one for a while. I don't think that's a bad thing. I've been thinking a lot about how we interact with our community and the number of committees we have and the number of people that requires, and can we think about a different way? Can we be more nimble? Can we have people we just know we can go to on a topic and say, look, got this project problem. Do you have a few weeks or 6 weeks to engage on it and give us some advice? And really have groups of people that are out there to help us when we need it, or that bring us or rec or public or whoever things that need to be worked on. And then we can, you know, to be more nimble, to be more creative, to get more voices in, to not have these separate little silos that then require whole you know, times that we need to meet with them. They're, you know, they're all then under different meeting requirements, different nights. You know, like I think we have this opportunity as a new city. I said I keep it brief. We have this opportunity as a new city to really kind of look at how we're doing this. And I think I just ask for folks to give us a chance to get the city going. I know that sounds a little lame, but we really just need a chance to get the city going. We're going to talk about this. We're going to engage the community on it. We need a couple of years or a year. I'm sorry, we just need some time.
I've always been a proponent of involving the community, and I think we saw with the manager search committee that you can ask the community to do that very serious, very, in some ways, pretty difficult work, and they step up. They step up. I think they're in a way we need to do more of that. Give the community some important jobs, some really important jobs. And I think they'll step up, and I think they'll come out of the woodwork to do it. So.
Absolutely. And that needs facilitation, which is why you're seeing some of these positions in the budget recommended, because we need people to interact with the community in that way.
Yeah.
So I mean, when we talk about that, I just want to make sure as we're talking about the budget and everything that people understand it's not the entire reason we're not, you know, we need more people, but we have a lot of things we want to do here as a community. And I think that requires a conversation, and that requires some staff, and it's different than what we thought 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but I will say that I'm a proponent of just simply just rip off the Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Very difficult. So we want to hear from more people if it's not the right way to go, or if it is.
Well, you know, you're having really important conversations right here, right now. And that's the beginning. I certainly hear more opinions and ideas, and I think that's certainly where you start. But you know, I'm just a strong proponent of getting the community involved and in really important work. So go for it.
Thank you, Bridget.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Sorry, just mostly since we are talking about the budget, just want to be clear that I get the point about the EJRP budget, but just so most folks know that a very strong majority of that is not a general fund expense at the property tax. It is
Right.
a program-based enterprise
It's
fund,
enterprise,
essentially.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Right. The overwhelming majority, something like 2/3 or 3/4 of EJRP's revenue and expenditures goes through the enterprise funds, which are user fees by the people who use those things, whether that be our childcare, licensed childcare, the recreation programs in general, the pool, all those things, which are not in the general fund and so are not paid for by taxes. Anybody else in the room? Seeing no hands in the.
So I've got my email in and I warned you.
Yep.
You email.
That may not be the last one.
Email.
Your email is in the reading file.
It is an email. I would love if there's anybody online or in the room that would maybe go up and speak, and I wouldn't have to, but if not,
At least
There's one person online who'd like to speak.
could we hear from them? Maybe they're gonna speak for me.
Maybe. Elise.
Oh, good Lord. I'm supposedly maybe speaking for someone. I apologize. I am not putting my camera on because, as my grandma said, I don't have my face on. So I wanted to just chime in and said, one, I'm voting yes on this budget. So thank you so much for all the hard work. I really appreciate it. I wanted to also voice my support for Marlon's position on the stipend. I do have a bit of a conflict of interest in this, but I thought it was important enough to step forward and say that I think, number one, it is an equity issue. I hope it doesn't end there as a conversation about increasing a stipend, but potentially how do we also remove other barriers from people's way to level the playing field and give them the opportunity to serve. So I really encourage the council to think of not only raising a stipend, and I'd like to see debate over the amount, but also about other things like maybe supporting childcare, things like that, giving more options for virtual options, which I think we're moving towards. But I think this is critical piece of work for the city to show a commitment to. The second thing that I would say in support of the stipend is there's a value to people's time and their volunteering and serving. And I also support this in the legislature, paying the people in the legislature for all their time, because it certainly is a barrier. And I really would like to just acknowledge everyone who does put in their time, whether it be on a committee, on a council, an elected position, that's time away from their families, that's time away from their education, that's time away from their own sort of self-care. So I think that value should be acknowledged. And I think one way we do that is financially. So thank you for that. I also want to voice my support for an advisory committee for EJRP, but I do believe that it takes a little thought, and we do want I want to understand fully what that advisory committee is responsible for, having worked in a lot of nonprofits that have boards and committees that staff reports to. It's very difficult to have so many people trying to drive the ship as a staff member, and we need to trust our staff to do the right thing with the proper oversight. But I'm sorry, I feel like the push to target EJRP at this time is more personal than it is about EJRP. And I think that I am totally open to an advisory committee conversation, but I'm willing to wait for that conversation to happen in a thoughtful, well-documented and process. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Elise. Next up on Zoom, we have Annie Cooper.
Hi, my push, Elise, is not personal. Andrew, speaking to you, I would like to say that a $4.6 million recreation budget, while 2/3 to 3/4 of it comes in through program, is residential income. It's income for the city. And so I think it's been a long time that we talk about how great it is, which it is great, of course. Absolutely, it is fantastic that programming brings in income. We are so fortunate to have a thriving recreation department. It's great. The recreation department manages many budgets. Our Village Our Voices had the 10K budget for that committee that Elise was on and Bridget was on and Elaine Haney was on. That was a great moment in time where that committee was formed. There's a committee for the Memorial Day Parade. That budget is managed by the rec department. I think it's so important that our rec department be supported and that things like the cash preferred during Halloween, that really threw me, friends. That really threw me. It really surprised me and it threw me. So that was the main impetus for my feelings about a rec advisory committee. That aside, George makes an excellent point that we've lost the ability to have discussions on the floor and point out particulars and vote on things that should be changed in the budget. And while I 100% agree with Australian ballot, and I 100% agree with how we're doing it, we need to change with that, like George said. We need to find ways to bring more community input as we go. And in regards to the stipend, I would like to see either there's a question on the ballot or discussion throughout the year. Just to take myself back one more time to the Rec Advisory Committee component. I don't mind what that committee gets determined to be. I trust that those of you sitting at that table and Regina and the rec department can determine what that committee does. I'm just frustrated that we've not had it for 7 years and this is an 8th year. So those are all my frustrations. Those are my thoughts about the stipend as well. And thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you, Annie. Harlan, are you good or?
I'm still coming, no.
All right. You can have the final word.
Boy, it's a lot to take in.
No, you're done.
And as I said in my email, tough conversations, and I appreciate you guys doing that. Great conversations. George, I agree with you that there should be discussion. The problem is it's really difficult, and then it's kind of interesting. We're talking about like some marginalized groups. And trying to give everybody a voice. And I don't think putting the question on the ballot answers anything. If anything, we've discovered, and actually you wouldn't be, it's not actually on the ballot, right? It's a separate question, very similar to what we did before. The problem is you can't get enough information, education, as Bridget spoke to it. It just gives you a kind of yes or no. And honestly, because we're talking about taxes, I don't think there's a person around here that will claim that they have never at some point in their life said, no more taxes, no more new taxes. Just, that's our goal to you is always don't raise our taxes. I think if you did get into public discussion, if you found a unique way, social media is not going to cut it. Some of these marginalized communities can't get on social media. Front Porch Forum, anything within the internet. Don't get me wrong, we're reaching way more people than we ever used to. I don't know if we're still reaching some of these marginalized communities. And again, to go back to public discussion, I think you're gonna get 50-50. I don't think you're gonna get an answer. I don't think they're gonna point you in a direction. I think this board is faced with one of the tough reasons that you guys all signed up for, which is you're gonna make a decision and you're gonna get yelled at. Some people are not gonna be happy with you. Other people are gonna support you a ton. And the other thing that I found interesting is I was thinking you let the cat out of the bag, right? Okay. So we go to, let's say we pick 6,500, only because I'm a little competitive and I like to be first. And if we go to 6,500, we're the first community to ever do it. But I'll go back to 5 if that's where we need to go. I felt like you left, I feel like you let the cat out of the bag, right? We do 6,500, we're never gonna pivot. But then I got thinking about it, it is a line item. I mean, technically, we could just reduce the budget and pull it out of there. So I guess we could pivot and then we'd have to figure out how many years do we give it an opportunity to see if it changes the board, right? How many voting cycles do we go through before we pivot? So it's a big conversation. I could go either way. A piece of me that says pull the trigger. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. Let's get yelled at for a little while and see what happens.
Thank you, Harlan. You gonna join us in the yelling?
Okay.
Never mind. I'll talk to you offline.
No.
I'm standing behind Harlan.
Thank you, Harlan. All right. Raisa, got your hand in at just the last moment.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I couldn't get to the hand. I completely support increasing the stipend, not to this amount and not to this way. I was a very strong supporter of merger. And then when it was clear that that was never going to happen, I was an extremely strong supporter of separation. I said at that time, and I meant it, if I'm paying the same amount of taxes, however, it's all staying in the city, I'm okay with that. I am having a real hard time with my money going to the town. However, looking at this budget, I'm not seeing that there was any attempt to start it from where we were only as a city and adding from there. So referring to the budget increase as 1.6%, it may be 1.5, I may have that wrong. That's not quite the case, and it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable that a city council is saying, we're going to add this as a line item to our budget and include in there an annual inflation increase. You know, I know how much work you guys do. I can talk about my conversation with Raj, which took up way too much of his time, and I appreciated his time. You all do so much. That's not the question. The question is $25 plus an hour, which most people don't make in our community because that's what's considered the livable wage. That seems like an overreach. When I saw the 6,500, I viewed it as, this is smart. You ask for 6,500 because you're going to get 3,000 and be really thrilled with it. But apparently that isn't the case. The case is you want 6,500 now. You're not willing to wait a year from now, as George has suggested. And you want there to be, in addition to that, an additional inflation increase each year. I've listened clearly to everything everyone has said. And I keep coming back to what Raj said about, you know, it's always us. And he's right. And all I keep thinking is, this is a real push for me to consider the outliers, to consider voting for the people who aren't part of quote unquote us. Because I think that right now we need a shakeup. It is very sad that George, with all of his institutional history, is leaving. That Dan, with all of his institutional history, and frankly, a view that is different than mine, is leaving. I understand them leaving. I completely do. There comes a point you want to get on with your life. But when I asked at the beginning, is this something that would be as an amendment or as part of a line item? This was why. I agree that there needs to be discussion. I agree that it's not something that people will automatically understand, but considering how high our budget is over what we paid only to the city, adding this as a line item feels to me like you're trying to hide it. I know you're not doing that. It's been very clear. It's been all over Facebook. It's been in the packets, but you know, I really believe this is something that should go to the community. And if the council doesn't believe that the community will have the council's best interest at heart, I think that says something about the relationship between the community and the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Raisa. The only couple pieces of clarification I just wanted to put out there. You talk about an annual increase. That isn't guaranteed unless we put that into the charter, which would then be voted upon by the community. It would have to be discussed every single year by the board, approved of by the board, to then be approved of by the voters through the budget process. So we here can't guarantee that in 5 years it would increase at the rate of inflation without that charter change. And then just with it being the city council stipends, within our charter, it's supposed to be its own unique line item within our budget, so that way it would clearly show what that stipend is. So it wouldn't be hidden among any other purpose. So it wouldn't be within, say, the public works paving budget so that nobody could find it. So it does have to be its own unique line item, just so you're aware.
Thank you for that. My comment about the annual inflation rate is because that is stated in Raj's memo. So that's where I got that.
Yep.
And I realize that it's a separate line item. It not being an amendment, it's just like the council voted on this and passed is a little questionable. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Risa. So do I want to talk about the combined city budget? No. Bless you. Okay, there's no other hands up. So we will go on to business item 6B, a discussion and consideration of moving the annual meeting date and discussion on the annual meeting election and preparation schedule.
Okay, let me find this.
While you're finding that, I do want to offer two apologies. One, I want to apologize that the community has not had an apology from the council or anybody on the council for where we are and even needing to have this conversation. So for that first portion, I apologize. And the second apology here is the fact that when we put this schedule together, when we put out the annual meeting happening, we did not look at a calendar that was more inclusive than a calendar that personally I would have grown up with throughout my entire life. And so I did not know at that point in time that this was the first day of Passover. Moving forward, what we will be doing is we will be using a more inclusive calendar that will have more holidays that would be recognized, more days of importance that would be recognized. And so just on behalf of myself, I think I can speak for the city council here broadly of offering my apology to the community for this oversight. And so I am sorry for that as well.
Okay, so thank you, Andrew. So the memo points out some of that information and essentially, so because the charter now has all of your voting done by Australian ballot, which we've talked about quite a bit tonight, the annual meeting itself really can be the voting day. So this memo is recommending that you change the annual meeting to April 11th, which is the date that everybody will be voting. And then with that, you've got to have your informational meeting 10 days prior to that. So the recommendation here is that the annual meeting move to April 11th and the informational meeting happen the night before on the 10th. We're thinking that the best way to do the informational meeting is a completely online meeting because the school will be hosting their informational meeting at the high school that prior night before. Sorry, what else do I want to point out here? We also just want to let folks know we are aware that there used to be a much more fun community dinner event with the committees outside trying to explain what they did and try to get some more folks to come into the room. And we have looked into that logistically to figure out if we can make that happen. And we certainly can't do it on the 10th. And we have investigated whether we can do it for some other kind of event in between now and then. And it just logistically isn't possible. So that's why we're suggesting an online meeting for the informational meeting, because if folks really want to come, this room is not big enough. We can't be in the high school. And so online might be the best way to get the most people to participate. Also, I will point out that for a lot of people in your consent agenda, you have the concept of mailing ballots. If we mail ballots, a lot of people will be voting way earlier than April 10th. And so the whole process is a little bit different and changed at this point. And really, perhaps at some point we'll get some state statute changes that kind of identify this new future that we're in for prepping for local elections. I think that's it.
Thank you, Regina. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns?
Now, my only comment is that if, if we just saw with the Board of Civil Authority, if we're going to move the operation over to CVE, probably it's too, obviously can't do it this year, but once you settle in over there, you might be able to have your kind of fun dinner over there. Certainly CVA, I'm sure, would be amenable to that. But it's too soon, but I think that's a good plan.
The other portion as well, one of the nice things about doing it at the high school was also just that dinner side being frankly very inexpensive.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't have it in this budget that we know of, at least, to be able to recreate that and have some kind of private catering entity, as the school right now doesn't have the capacity to do those kinds of events anymore. But yes, absolutely would love to be able to get back to that point in time.
No, you can do it.
We'll get there.
You can do it.
We'll get there.
You're not gonna come back.
No, I'm not going to be, I won't be part of it, but you can do it.
Anything else from the council? Marcus, I see your hands up.
Quick question based on how I read this memo, because the way that it's worded here, an informational meeting is required 10 days prior to the annual meeting. If you have it the night before, that's within 10 days. The way I read this, it sounds like it needs to be April 1st.
Oh. Within 10 days. You can't, you have to have it within the 10 days of the vote.
Okay, just
Yep.
wanted to
Yep.
make sure I was reading it.
Yeah, sorry,
It's-
that's confusing in here.
Yeah. Appreciate that clarification. And yeah, as a part of what Regina was talking about with the lack of alignment with current practice and capabilities to do mail-in ballots, and yeah, unfortunately. I would entertain a motion.
Okay, I will move that the city council move the 2023 annual meeting from Wednesday, April 5th, 2023 to Tuesday, April 11th, 2023 to vote for the village officers and transact any business involving voting by Australian ballot.
Second.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Dan. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Great, so that passed unanimously. And next up is something else.
This is,
Just a minor.
That was great. Crescent Connector. This is the, all right, come on, Rick.
this is a good thing.
Rick's here.
I'd be very happy to talk to you
I'm thrilled that you're here for this. I'm not.
and answer all of your questions.
Yeah. I can start us off if you'd like. So essentially, we are ready to award the bid for phase 2 of the actual construction of the roadway itself. You've got a lot of attachments here in the memo, but essentially, we have identified a low bid and are recommending that you move forward on that bid award. We are also identifying here in the amendment that there are a number of non-participating items that the city will have to cover, and some of that we don't 100% know what that cost is going to be yet, particularly with the contaminated soils that have to be addressed. But there are some other things which George, you've excellent memory, knew that there were some of these bike racks and other kinds of in-street amenities associated with that. So I'll leave it at that.
So where we find ourselves is at the end of a trip that's lasted 12 years to date. A little bit longer than that, but from the preliminary studies, the scoping studies, the alternative analysis, the environmental assessment, the corrective action plan, the design, the right-of-way acquisition, all of those process steps over the last 12 years have brought us to this point where we're ready to actually complete the work and actually do the construction. And before I go into any other details, let me just say that, as you can imagine, a project like this, it's extremely complicated. It's like a giant flywheel, and it starts moving very slowly. And as we get closer to the end, it's moving very quickly. And Regina has joined us at a point where this carousel, this flywheel, is moving very quickly, and could easily have been thrown to the ground when confronted with it, or definitely stepped on and joined it, which she has. We've all been very impressed with how fast she's been able to catch up with where we all are after 12 years of focus on this project. So it's been really awesome to watch.
That's why we hired her.
Exactly. Good choice. So we're at the point, as I say, we've got a bidder, a low bidder, and in our current bidding environment over the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, to get a low bid that was lower than the engineer's estimate has been very rare. Over the last year and a half, 2 years, the bids have been significantly higher than the engineer's estimate. But in this case, it was actually 1.6% lower than the engineer's estimate that DuBois and King, the design engineers, prepared, which is great news for us. This project is 100% funded, except for the things that we've talked about, by state and federal funds. So it's a part of the circumferential alternative projects, although we don't use that term anymore. So the main work of this project is 100% funded by state and federal funds to build the project. The bid has been completely analyzed based on VTrans standards, and you'll see in your package if you want to delve into it deeply, but there are multiple tests that a bid must go through and filters to make sure that there's no disadvantage, in this case to the city, to awarding that low bid. And the bid analysis, which is multiple pages of specifically looking at line item by line item of the bid, has determined both the design engineer's review and VTrans concurs that there is no, and the term of art here is no disadvantage to the city in issuing and accepting this bid and issuing a contract to this contractor, which is the finding that you hope to find with a low bid. So that's where we're at. As Regina says, the one piece that's still unknown is because a portion of this work is along the historic railroad right-of-way, and the railroad over time used both coal and wood. That emissions from those engines created some contamination in the soil, mainly metals, arsenic for one. And so right now, the good folks at VTrans are examining what the city has done up to this point in terms of due diligence related to those contaminated soils. Our initial read is that the city, through all this process over the last 12 years, has done every single thing possible to mitigate that. And so we're hoping that the findings from the good folks at VTrans are that they will pay all or a large percentage of the cost of the disposal. Our initial read throughout the project leading up to this point, even before that finding, was a hope for a 50-50 split. I'm hoping that we get a little bit more. If they came back and said there's no participation for the soils, that plus the bicycle racks, the bike boxes, EV charging stations, some other things that the city wanted that aren't really considered under VTrans as a part of a necessary part of the project for this type of funding. The percentage would be about 3%, just a hair over 3% of the total project cost. So again, very small percentage against what the city will get from this project. And so that's where we're at this point, and ready to go. As you may know, phase one of the project has already been completed. And that was all the railroad work that happened this summer. So the reconstruction of every single crossing within the city limits that hadn't been upgraded recently. So short of the North Street crossing, which had been rebuilt. So Central Street was rebuilt, Maple Street, Main Street, Park Street North, Park Street South, and South Summit Street crossing were rebuilt. The West Street extension had been rebuilt a few years before. So that was phase one of the project, all new signals, all new crossing panels, and a lot of railroad infrastructure was worked on this summer. So phase 2 is the road comes along behind. As you know, the road will start on Park. It will traverse the lands of McEwing, Phalanges, Mr. Knox, all provided easements to the city along with the railroad. At Maple Street, there'll be a new signalized intersection. The railroad street will be completely reconstructed from Maple to Main. And there'll be a new signalized intersection at the intersection of the Crescent Connector and Park Street. So bike lanes will be on both sides of the road. So we'll have a bike lane connection all the way from Park to Main. Sidewalks, public parking will be a part of the project as a part of the infrastructure, and the entire street route will be lit. So quite an improvement for that stretch to get you from Park to Main. So that's where we're at, and we're hoping that you agree that it's move ahead and do the final step.
I remember it was about 9 or so years ago, we were having the conversation about the bonds for Briar and some other construction projects at this same time. And a staff member at that point in time had said, this is going to be one real busy construction season, especially with the Crescent Connector coming in this upcoming construction season. And here we are 9 years later.
Well, you were still a good predictor of current and future events, because right now we're teed up to do all the water line replacement on Main Street, the culvert replacement on Brickyard, and the Crescent Connector project. So it'll still be a busy summer.
It will. So I'll make sure to repost that post from 9 years ago to the Facebook community to say it's going to be a very busy construction season again this year. Yeah. This is absolutely fantastic. Thrilled that it's happening. Can't wait for the Crescent Connector to come through. George, Dan, I know how many times you've spoken about this.
This started with a meeting in the governor's office in 2011, and then probably I would say, were you with the Circ Alternative? Were you with the RPC with the Circ Alternative Task Force?
It just started in 2011, and I think they were kind of wrapped up.
I think I spent 100 hours getting this beast through the Circ Alternative Task Force, because we had to go to every possible person in the state who could say no to us and convince them to say. But it was wonderful, every single moment of it. But yeah, this would be great. I'm going to reserve the right to make this motion, so you can ask more questions, but it helped me put this puppy to bed here.
I was going to shush somebody else if anybody tried. Go ahead.
No, I'm very happy to see this project moving forward now. When I came on the board, John Laja was the primary rep to the Regional Planning Commission. It was two, actually. It was Regional Planning Commission, and the CCRPC was, MPO and Regional Planning, Metropolitan Planning, and we combined. But anyhow, so I saw this from the get-go, starting up, and the other projects all the way through down in Williston, and we had our group of it's a small group because it was the communities that were actually would have been impacted had the CERC been built. So us, the town, Williston, Colchester,
CERC communities.
That's it. It was quite interesting, but we're finally here.
I will point out that Colchester, their Circ Alternative project was this complicated diamond intersection. Have you been keeping up on that? And that thing looks. Our project is way better than that.
They've started there, so they've started there at 16. Cool. It's called the Diverging Double Diamond Intersection.
Diverging Double Diamond.
Yeah. And
great name.
It
is.
It's going to be.
It does.
It's going to be several years, but if you drive up by exit 16 on Route 7 and Route 2, it's combo. You'll see they've got concrete blocks. And they're digging away. on the south side to the bridge toward the bridge abutments and that side. So
It's not
it
the
is
George
happening.
Taylor Memorial Crescent Connect.
Yeah, right, sure.
But things take time. I mean, up in Grand Isle, they've got a new drawbridge.
Yep.
It's taken many years,
It
but
takes a long time.
COVID didn't help.
And it's taken a lot of tenacity, hard work by
Certainly
some
by-
of you here in this room,
Yeah.
those who are not in this room as well.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be where it is without everybody who's been a part of it. Deeply appreciative and thankful
Yep.
for all of you.
Yep.
I'm not seeing any other questions, George. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Okay, I will recommend that the City Council award the Crescent Connector Phase 2 project to the lowest bidder, Engineers Construction Incorporated, and authorize Hamlin Engineering to manage the construction phase of the project and authorize the city manager to execute the contracts.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. Great, that passed unanimously, or you would have been voted off the board.
Wow.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you.
Getting late
Yeah.
in the night, getting punchy.
We'll see you this summer next to all the big yellow equipment.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. And Raj, you wanted to bring up the minutes?
Yeah, a couple quick things in the minutes. And I just found this one, page 115, or sorry, line 115. I don't know, I just saw it, so I'm gonna bring it up. Bridget is spelled with an I-T. It's Bridget Meyer, and I know it's not how she spells her name. But more importantly, what I was bringing up the first time was part of line 104 in our conversation about the stipends. Just the word vision on line 104. I think it changes the meaning of what the discussion was. I think the original word was aesthetic and then changed to appearance. I think vision in this context would refer to how the board sees the future of the community as opposed to what I think the conversation was actually about.
So would you propose an amendment? So 104 change.
I think Dan changed it to appearance, so I would go with that. So in the final comment, so change the word vision to appearance in the end of line 104.
As well as on 115,
Bridget.
Bridget, Bridget,
Yeah.
not IT.
Yeah, she probably like that.
All right. Anybody have anything else? I'll entertain them. Wait. Yep. So you'd like to make that motion to amend?
Yes, I move to amend the minutes as described.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Pass unanimously. And that will bring us into the consent agenda.
Would we approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Great. And so now we will go into the reading file and board member comments. The only thing I wanted to mention, the Board of Civil Authority met right before this meeting, for those of you who weren't present for that, and made the decision that voting will no longer happen for this voting in April and for this upcoming year of 2024. Voting will happen at CVE, so Champlain Valley Expo, and will not be happening at the high school. This should allow for more parking. In terms of accessibility, the parking will be on a flat surface. You won't have to go up a ramp. It will be heated and or air conditioned depending on the temperature. It won't be in a school, so that way, from a school safety standpoint, you won't have guests going into the school, and so that crowd control will be able to be managed significantly better, especially as, in case you did not hear about the school shooting hoax that happened today, that dynamic would not be played out during voting. So be on the lookout. It will be different, but it will be an exciting change, and hope that it goes well. Does any member have anything else?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
Wow. Quick. All in favor.
What else you have?
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Have a good night, everybody.